In the spring of 2026, in Action Comics issue 1100, Amanda Waller killed Superman. Not in an alternate universe, not in a dream sequence, not in an Elseworlds imprint designed to exist outside the primary canon. In the main continuity of the DC universe, the director of ARGUS and the architect of the Suicide Squad removed the most powerful hero on Earth, and she did it deliberately, as the calculated opening move in a plan that has been accumulating for nearly 3 years of DC publication. The method of death is not a conventional superhero story. Superman does not fall in battle. He does not sacrifice himself for a cause greater than his own survival. He is eliminated through deliberate targeting. Waller spent months developing a delivery mechanism that combines concentrated kryptonite radiation with a compound introduced in the Dawn of DC initiative called the Black Miracle. The compound interacts with Kryptonian cellular biology at a rate that prevents the natural regeneration Kryptonian physiology relies on under a yellow sun. His powers cannot outrun the compound's progress through his system. By the final pages of issue 1100, Clark Kent is dead. The DC universe no longer has its most recognizable symbol. Understanding why Waller did this requires understanding who Amanda Waller actually is, and what she has believed for decades of DC continuity. She is not a villain in the conventional sense of the word. She does not seek conquest. She does not want to rule the world or destroy it. She wants to control the metahuman population, and she has believed since her earliest appearances that the existence of beings with godlike power represents an existential threat to the stability of ordinary human civilization. Every metahuman conflict that ends with a city leveled, a dimension ruptured, or a civilian casualty count in the thousands adds more evidence to her argument. She has been making that argument in the margins of the DC universe for years. In issue 1100, she stopped making the argument and started acting on it. The escalation of her plan over the preceding 3 years of DC continuity was visible in retrospect, but difficult to track in real time. The Suicide Squad was quietly retooled from a field operations team into a covert elimination unit. Its targets shifted from supervillains to metahumans Waller categorized as unsanctioned threats to civilian stability. Individual operational dossiers were developed on every active Justice League member. Waller selected Superman as the first target not because he represents the greatest physical threat to her operation, but because he represents the greatest symbolic threat. His existence anchors the moral authority of the entire hero community. His death sends a message to every metahuman alive. Waller's operation functions without the constraints of that authority. The aftermath of issue 1100 is unfolding across 3 distinct narrative threads in current DC continuity, each tracking a different response to what Waller has done. The first thread is Batman. Bruce Wayne had already been monitoring Waller's escalation, building a parallel intelligence operation, mapping her network and her assets. Superman's death compresses his timeline significantly. Batman does not grieve passively. He investigates. What the investigation reveals about how deeply Waller's operation has embedded itself into legitimate government infrastructure is the first major revelation of the post-110 storyline. The institutional penetration runs far deeper than the League had understood. The second thread is Wonder Woman. Diana Prince and Superman have been close allies for decades of publication history, and his death strikes her differently than it strikes Batman. Diana does not have Batman's capacity for strategic compartmentalization. She does not open a casebook. She declares war. The issues immediately following 1100 follow Diana as she moves through the DC universe, issuing a direct statement to every power structure that matters. She holds Waller personally accountable. She will not be waiting for governmental investigation or legal process, and she will be applying direct pressure. This makes Diana one of the most dangerous figures in current DC continuity. Wonder Woman in mourning is not a character who pauses to consider proportionality. The third thread is the question of Superman's legacy. Jonathan Kent, Clark's biological son, has been operating in a parallel Superman capacity for several years of DC publication. His father's death raises immediate and unresolved questions about identity, succession, and responsibility. Does Jonathan assume the full mantle of Superman? Does he abandon the name in protest of what it now costs to carry it? Does he pursue Waller directly? The handling of Jonathan's response has been cited across multiple reviews of the early post-110 issues as the most emotionally precise element of the initial storyline. Beyond these 3 central threads, Superman's death has triggered a cascade effect across the entire DC universe. The Green Lantern Corps called an emergency session. Wally West, operating as the Flash, went dark, dropping off the grid and refusing all League communications. Arthur Curry closed the borders of Atlantis for the first time in years. Every active hero in the DC universe is now operating under one shared assumption. Amanda Waller has a dossier on them and a specific plan for removing them. The League is no longer looking outward at external threats. It is looking inward at the vulnerability she has exposed. This is Waller's secondary objective, and it is as important as the primary one. The first objective was to remove Superman as a symbol. The second is to fracture the League from the inside, because a League divided by panic and competing theories of how to respond is a League that cannot mount a coordinated defense. She does not need to defeat the Justice League in direct confrontation. She needs to create sufficient internal paralysis that the League defeats itself. Intelligence files recovered by Batman in the early investigation reveal dossiers on at least 7 additional League members. The identities confirmed in published issues include Hal Jordan, Shazam, and Zatanna. The inclusion of Zatanna is the most significant detail in those files. Waller has no obvious physical equivalent to kryptonite for a magic-based hero, which means she has been developing entirely new methodologies for power sets that cannot be addressed through conventional weaponization. The scope of her research infrastructure is considerably larger than the League previously understood. Lex Luthor's response to the death of Superman has been one of the more unexpected elements of the post-1100 storyline. Luthor has dedicated his intellectual and financial resources to opposing Superman for decades of publication history. His initial response to the news of Superman's death was not celebration, it was calculation. Luthor has stated publicly, within the fiction of the current continuity, that he opposes Waller's methodology not out of sentiment for Superman, but out of strategic objection. He did not build a decades-long rivalry to have it terminated by a bureaucrat with a compound. His involvement in the developing counter-operation against Waller has introduced one of the most morally complicated threads in current DC publishing. The significance of this event for DC Comics as a publisher exists alongside its significance as a story. Action Comics issue 1100 was positioned as the centerpiece of DC's 2026 publishing initiative. The decision to kill Superman in the main continuity, rather than within a contained Elseworlds format, represents a substantial creative and commercial commitment. That commitment was made because the alternative, continuing to publish Superman stories without escalating the stakes in a meaningful way, had been producing measurably declining engagement. The Waller event is designed to make the DC Universe feel genuinely dangerous again in a way that affects every title in the line simultaneously. The historical context for this decision is unavoidable. The death of Superman in 1992 was one of the best-selling comic events in the history of the medium, and that death was reversed within approximately 1 year of publication. Readers have known for 3 decades that superhero deaths are temporary. The creative team behind the Waller event has addressed this expectation directly. They have committed publicly to holding the death for a minimum of 18 months and have described their intention to use that period to demonstrate what the DC Universe becomes in the sustained absence of its most powerful figure. Whether that commitment survives commercial pressure will determine whether the Waller event functions as a genuine narrative turning point or another temporary disruption. The initial response to Action Comics 1100 has been the strongest opening performance DC has recorded in several years. The momentum is real. The story infrastructure is in place. Amanda Waller has operated in the margins of DC Comics for most of her publication history. A bureaucrat without powers, functioning through institutional authority, intelligence assets, and psychological leverage. In removing Superman from the DC Universe, she has moved to its absolute center. She is no longer supporting the main story. She is the main story, and the DC Universe is a considerably less stable place for having her there. That instability is precisely the point.